Well, good morning. It's good to be with you as we gather together again in Luke's Gospel as we continue studying Luke. It's been a good time thus far. Looking forward to another great moment here in Luke's Gospel. We're going to be reading a short passage today, but one that's important. We're going to be reading Luke chapter 9, verses 7 through 9. And my Bible has this here is perplexity, but there's a lot here though, more than just his perplexity. So Luke 9, 7 through 9. Now Herod, the ruler heard about all that had taken place, and he was perplexed, because it was said by some that John had been raised from the dead, by some that Elijah had appeared, and by others that one of the ancient prophets had arisen. Herod said, John I beheaded, but who is this about whom I hear such things? And he tried to see him. So when I read that, I thought, have we missed John's death in Luke's gospel? So I went back and read and realized no, that we haven't seen. We see in chapter, remember we saw it in chapter, was it chapter 6? Chapter 7? We see John the Baptist messengers come and say, are you the one? And we talked about that, how even John in the midst of prison doubted. And um and so I said, well, did it mention John being beheaded there? And I didn't see it. And I went back and read it, and no, there's nothing there about John the Baptist being beheaded. So then I said, well, let me look. Did I just miss it? And we already talked about it. So I went and read, and no, 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 no. I'm looking at all the sections. No, 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 no. And so I said, well, so I did some research, and I said that where's Luke placed John's death? And this is it. In Luke's gospel, this is the passage where we recount John the Baptist's beheading. In other gospels, Matthew and Mark particularly, it goes into more detail about what happened, what caused it to happen, and all these type things. Luke just basically says, it says, John I beheaded, but who is this about whom I hear such things? Um, and so um, we see now that John has been beheaded. John the Baptist has been killed by Herod. And that's interesting because Luke spends so much time earlier in the gospel talking about John the Baptist. We meet his parents, we see his ministry and all these type things. But and I think this is what's interesting. And this is maybe I'm over spiritualizing this right here. But John was adamant about what his job was and what he was to do. John was adamant that his job and his mission was to point others to Jesus. That's what John was put on the earth by God to do, to point others to Jesus. That was his purpose. And what do we see in Luke's gospel about his funeral? He died. He was beheaded. So I think in many ways, John the Baptist may like Luke's retelling the most because he didn't go into depth about who John was. He was focusing on Jesus, on what he was called to do and who he was called to be. He was focusing on Jesus. Um, and so we see Herod concerned about um, who is this one causing all this ruckus? Who is this one that Herod is perplexed? He had heard of all that's happening, and he was perplexed because it was said that this was John come back to life. John been raised from the dead, and maybe it was Elijah, or maybe a prophet. Um, Herod said, "Who is this? Who is this?" Um, Jesus should be perplexing at times, friends. You know, Jesus should uh, Jesus should confuse us. If Jesus doesn't confuse you at times, if he doesn't perplex you at times, then are we really searching after him? Because Jesus is not someone that we can always easily understand. Jesus does not always make sense. Jesus does not always um, have everything fall into place. He doesn't always play by our rules or do what we want or do as we would have him to do. But Jesus is going to do. He's going to obey the Father. and do what the Father wants and live and do as the Father asks. And so it's a mystery. Uh, and I think that is sometimes one of the hardest things to wrap our mind around is the fact that we want everything to always make sense. I want faith to always make sense. I want rationality. I want certainty. I want everything to be easy to understand, easy to figure out. I want it to be simple. I do. And that's not always the way God works. God does not always work like that. God does not always make sense. God does not always make things happen in our way of thinking or in our line of thinking. God's going to do what he thinks is his will. God's going to do his will. Jesus is going to follow the Father's will. And it doesn't always make sense. It is perplexing at times. And don't be afraid of that. I was having a conversation in the last few days about how the mystery of God is often hard to understand because mystery, God's perplexity, makes us hold on to faith. If I could understand God in my mind, if I could reason God in my mind, if I could easily understand what God was doing in my mind, then does that take faith? Like if God made sense, does that take faith? And sometimes with faith, the most important thing for us to do is simply embrace that we aren't going to understand everything, that it may not always make sense, that it may have layers and layers of confusion. And so sometimes we get undone with our faith because we want it to make sense and then we don't know what to do when it doesn't. And the way it works is that when we don't always understand and we don't always know and it doesn't always make sense. And when we are like Herod and we are perplexed by all that's happening, we have to trust. We have to trust the hand of the one who's leading us. And so it's an old trite church saying, but it's true. When we don't know what the future holds, we trust the one who holds the future. And as somebody who likes intellect, as somebody who likes to play in the domain of the mind, as somebody who likes for things to always be rational, sometimes I just got to turn off my intellect and my rationality and just trust. And that's hard for me. It's hard for me to trust when things don't make sense. It's hard for me to trust when I don't understand. It's hard for me to trust when I don't know what God's doing. It's hard for me to trust when I just don't like it. It's hard for me to trust those moments. I want to fix it. I want to make it right. I want to solve everything. I want to solve the puzzle. I want to crack the code. I want it to make sense, is what I want. So to simply be okay in the mystery and in the unknown that faith asks of us is a very challenging thing. But what I'll tell you is that's where freedom lies. Freedom lies in understanding that I can't understand and I can't fix and I can't always make it make sense and I can't do these things. So I just got to trust that God in his grace, in his mercy, in his spirit is going to be at work in ways that I can't understand and do things that I can't understand and bring things to completion that my mind can't see. When the mystery is too much, that's when we trust. When we don't understand is too great, that's when we trust. And when God doesn't always make sense, that's when we trust. Herod was perplexed. When was the last time God perplexed you? When was the last time God didn't make sense? And in those moments, In those moments, will we trust in God, even when it doesn't make sense? Hey, thanks for being with us today. Tomorrow we're going to pick up with the feeding of the 5,000. Can't wait to talk about it with you. Have a great day.